John Horgan.
Andrew Wilkinson.
Sonia Furstenau.
This is the theBreaker.news podcast. I'm Bob Mackin, and it's a historic night here in British Columbia, October 24th, 2020. British Columbia's coronavirus pandemic state of emergency snap election 2020. All TV networks are projecting an NDP majority, more than 50 seats. The BC Liberals in the low 30s, the Greens holding at 3. Premier John Horgan has won his gamble. But it's not over yet. It may not be for several weeks due to the mail-in ballots to get us the final numbers, but it's looking like British Columbia is tilting towards the orange. And tonight we have special guests joining us on the podcast, the Breaker.news podcast. We've got Tsakumis, former columnist and broadcaster. We've got Aziz Rajwani from the UBC Sutter School of Business and Langara School of Management. We've got Kash Heed, former BC Liberal MLA and Solicitor General. And we got Mike Klassen, a columnist, pundit, longtime BC Liberal member, executive with the BC Care Providers. First of all, why don't we start with you, Mike? The NDP now has to get back to work. They've lost a month now that the second wave is accelerating, but did you expect them to win as they have done tonight?
I think a lot of us expected them to win in the way that they did. I think that this 50 plus seats is not entirely surprising, given that Horgan's been sort of carrying this over the line for the last little while. He has been in unprecedented territory in terms of popularity across the country, in terms of premiers. We know that having a popular leader is a huge difference maker in terms of elections. This was a roll of the dice. I gather that Horgan, with his team, was maybe kind of sitting on the fence a little bit, but there are people in the party, including people like Jeff Meggs, who I think probably saw this was the opportunity to do it, and they've been able to carry it over the line. They're picking up seats like in Richmond, Chilliwack, and Langley like we never expected. This is going to be a bit of a rout, a lot of questions for the BC Liberal Party, and I think we'll probably see that they're going to have to do a lot of rebuilding over the next little while.
Over to Kash Heed. Kash, where did the BC Liberals under Andrew Wilkinson go wrong? This campaign featured a platform that was quite ambitious, the provincial sales tax holiday, and the ICBC monopoly, build the Massey Bridge, the referendum on the RCMP. Why weren't they able to, through Andrew Wilkinson, able to articulate these well enough to get some buy-in from voters?
Well, let me tell you, where they went wrong was prior to the 28 days, when the writ was dropped and went to this election here, is they went wrong several years ago and even months ago, where in fact they didn't deal with some of the internal politics that they had to deal with in order for them to have a stable party to go to an election. You know, there's some dead wood in that party, I hate to say it. And I looked at the roster and I said to myself, and I said to others, there's probably 24 people that need to go from the BC Liberals that are current sitting MLAs. You need to refresh that party. You need to bring in some fresh blood. It's like a ship that's at sea and it's rotting, where in fact you need to change plank by plank, or you bring it into the port and redo it. They need to bring it into the port and redo it now. So regardless of the drunken sailor promises that were made for over these 28 days by the Liberals, and really no secure plan or policy on how they're going to pay for this, it didn't resonate in the minds of the voters. The people that I talked to, the people that were engaged in some of the discussions, it didn't resonate in their minds. People were worried about their health and safety. They're worried about their families. They're worried about their kids going to school. They didn't care about the other stuff. They didn't care about some of the things that the Liberals were bringing up. The Liberals would have been smart if for the first week they would have nailed Horgan on his arrogance for calling the election during the pandemic. But if you look at what he did, he came out and tried to do policy for policy with Horgan. It's hard to do policy for policy when you've got a sitting government that you're up against. He should have done that. Then he should have started talking more comprehensively about the policy. And I think, Bob, at the end of the day, people knew that it was just grasping at straws, trying to get reelected. Really, when you look at both those parties, I don't think they can deliver a quarter of what they said they could in their platform.
To Aziz Rajwani, they say that politics is for children and economics is for adults. The campaign is over and the counting will continue, but the NDP's got their majority. Now it's the hard part. They have to deliver on promises. They have to find a way to decrease the deficit. They also have to deal with the pandemic, the second wave of the pandemic. John Horgan did not reveal his tax plan. There's a budget to be presented in February. What does this government do? And do you think that they have what it takes to take on perhaps the biggest challenge in British Columbia history?
Well, the economic challenge that they face is that they've got a rising debt. I mean, the debt can be obviously attributed to something unexpected that happened. The credit rating agencies have reduced the Government of Canada's rating from AAA to AA+. The most recent rating that all the three credit rating agencies gave to British Columbia was July at the earliest, was maintained at AAA. But that was before a lot of these promises were made, and it remains to be seen now with the majority how the NDP acts. They go back to their old ways, or do they try and do, as a centrist government, try and do what's good for business and do what's good for unions and for society as a large? Will they be able to manage that very well? And they'll always have an excuse, because the old Michael Jackson song was, don't blame it on the sunshine, don't blame it on the moonlight, don't blame it on the good times, blame it on the boogie. In this case, if anything does go wrong economically, the song will be just blame it on COVID. And so it'll be really interesting to see how they manage. Particularly small businesses need a lot of help right now. And how the government manages that is going to be really interesting. Kash mentioned that the policy plank that the Liberals had wasn't maybe not well thought out. And that makes total sense, because they weren't prepared. They really did not think that an election was going to get called. Horgan was playing footsie with them, getting them to work together for the betterment of British Columbians in total. And then all of a sudden, they were planning this. They were prepared. All of a sudden, if you want to apply a sports analogy, they brought on the 2-minute offense when no one expected it, and the defense wasn't prepared for that. And it's preparedness, to me, that's the most important thing. The plank wasn't cohesive enough to actually take to the electorate and explain it to them in general terms and keep doing it over and over and over again. It was like the plank was still getting built. Okay, was this a Hail Mary? What was it? And to me, it was just unpreparedness. And the whole idea about a term election, set dates, is that you don't give that advantage to the ruling party. And they took that advantage. It remains to be seen from a legal standpoint, since there's a couple, Democracy Watch and Wayne Crooks have launched a lawsuit. See where that goes. But this definitely was politically astute by the New Democratic Party to call the election at this opportunistic time.
Now to Alex Tsakumis. Before the polls closed today, the BC Liberal President Paul Barbeau sent an email to supporters. He wanted money for what he called an election integrity fund, and it referenced that there still are a lot of mail-in ballots to be counted, about 500,000 mail-in ballots to be counted, and they were looking for money so they could pay for people to monitor the polls and possibly even lawyers. He was making suggestions that this was going to be an illegitimate result and that it can be called tonight, but he may have to eat his words. Talk about that strategy to issue that kind of an email before the polls close, not an email to remind people to get out the polls if you haven't voted yet, but an email like that to cast doubt on the results.
Yeah, I hear the President of the United States has called Paul Barbeau and wants his policy back. The problem with making statements like that is that, number one, he's demonstrating that he knows he's going to lose. Number two, he's immediately taking the approach that somehow there's an illegitimacy to what arguably is a fair election. I don't think even the 500,000 ballots, depending on where they're from, I don't even think the 500,000 ballots are really going to make that big a difference. But I've, as Mike Klassen has, I've dealt with Paul. He's a nice guy, but I think he's out of his depth. And I think the team around Andrew Wilkinson is clearly out of their depth. They had a golden opportunity here to try and at least put their best foot forward. But you know, I just go back to what Kash said, because I think that will be the tale of the tape at the end of the day. The BC Liberals did absolutely no renewal whatsoever. They had back-to-back premiers who were the number 3 and number 2 best retail politicians in the history of the province. The best retail politician in the history of the province was Bill Vanderzam, followed by Christy Clark, followed by Gordon Campbell. They were brilliant. You could put them in as campaigners. You could put them in a room with people who deeply disliked them, and they were able to win some of these people over. There were 2 people who got Christy Clark elected, and only 2. One was Adrian Dix when he flip-flopped on Kinder Morgan, and the other was Christy Clark. All she needed was a cutout of Adrian Dix, pointed to it every time she went into another town in BC and said, see that guy? That guy doesn't want food on your table. I do. And Andrew Wilkinson had a golden opportunity to go throughout the province. Vaughn Palmer, quite by accident, I'm sure, brilliantly laid out the one plank, the only plank that Andrew Wilkinson needed in a column in the first week, when he said, in words to the effect of, if you cannot trust John Horgan on his ability to stick to an agreement, how can you trust anything he's going to say throughout the election? Now, I happen to know John Horgan. John Horgan's a friend of mine, and you can trust. But that plank was absolutely essential in the BC Liberal platform. And instead, you had Wilkinson out there saying stuff like, well, I'm a country doctor. Well, yeah, but you were also a lawyer for Big Tobacco. So when you were trying to save people's lives, a decade later, you were defending people whose industry has killed millions. I mean, there were so many things that were wrong with the BC Liberal campaign. It just isn't even funny. But I'll tell you, the other tale of the tape will be Vision Vancouver. The NDP should thank 10 years of useless, punitive government in the city of Vancouver that thrashed affordability and sent tens of thousands of young people that became young families into places like Langley East, into places like Maple Ridge, into places like Surrey, into pockets of throughout the province where the NDP were never competitive before. And they left Vancouver for a better life. And when they sat there, they said to themselves, well, what did the government really do for me? Gordon Campbell and Christy Clark were arrogant and elitist. They didn't care about these young families. They didn't care about Tim the Tool Belt or Wendy the Waitress. They had a formula. Vancouver, Surrey, the Okanagan, and the North. They didn't care about anything else. So the Valley, where, you know, for years it was traditionally conservative, traditionally BC Liberal, where they could count on it, go have a look at Mike DeYoung's win. You tell me that's a win. The NDP have risen exponentially in places like that, where typically they would never make a mark. They wouldn't lay a glove on the BC Liberals. Now, there is the other thing, in fairness, that we had a pretty low voter turnout this time around. But still, these are the stories that should make a difference. I'm out of the media, and I'm doing this only as a favor because you won't leave me alone. But I you know, in business, I hear it all the time. The only people that the NDP have pissed off are the guys that would never traditionally vote for them. So congratulations to John and to his team. I don't think that they're going to be punitive. This is all Jeff Meggs. Mike knows this as well as I do because we had to deal with with Jeff and his crew when we were covering civic politics. Megs is the world's worst politician and one of the best backroomers you will ever meet. He is a searingly bright strategist. It was his push to have this election happen. Congratulations to him. He has the uncanny ability of taking candidates and regardless of whether they're likable like Horgan or not likable like Larry Campbell, he was his chief of staff, and turning them into superstars. And I think you can't argue with the results.
Okay, now it's time for a bit of free-for-all. This election, because of the pandemic, had to be held in a very different fashion. We got the mail-in ballots, which still have to be counted, of course, but the campaign itself, a socially distant campaign. The NDP was planning for this back in June. They had a series of online seminars themselves by Zoom, the Level Up seminars, where they discussed new ways of reaching voters and fundraising. That really set the table for this. But we've had fewer in-person events. Any events that have happened have been smaller. And it's been a campaign like no other. It's not a traditional town hall, all candidates meetings. Some candidates got in trouble by using technology, and that gave fodder for the NDP especially to attack them. Does anyone see any elements of this campaign which could become permanent? Because we also saw the leaders transporting themselves around or having their staff transport themselves around. We didn't see the bus fulls of media. We didn't see much media on the campaign trail. Media was calling in by phone. Technology has really changed the way campaigning has been done in British Columbia here in 2020. Is this the new normal for the way a political campaign will be in British Columbia, maybe elsewhere? Who wants to answer?
Sure, I can start there, Bob. I actually do think that the Zoom reality is going to be part of electioneering from this time forward. The fact is that it's become much more easy for people to have this come right into their living room, into their home office, wherever they have a computer or a smartphone device. I don't think it really made a huge difference in the case of this election. I know that there are a lot of people in the media pack that would love to be able to get to be in those rooms, waiting for the results coming in, talking as they do over a few cold beer with some of the candidates, and getting a little bit of a sense of what happened in the election over the last 30 days. But the fact is that we've been able to conduct this campaign without any major disruption. I know there's been a mix of mail-in ballots, dropping in at the polling places, advanced polling, and of course, Election Day today. It didn't turn out to be the great concern from a health standpoint that a lot of people were worried about. And I do think that this kind of a situation we're facing right now with the actual pandemic kind of going on will be something that we're anticipating for the long term. Hopefully we'll get a vaccine and some kind of normalcy. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see how, with this substantial majority, how Premier-elect Horgan and his team are going to be able to roll forward. I'm looking forward to kind of hearing from my fellow commentators tonight. I think this is actually going to be a very interesting time for the province. We've got a lot of very strong actors that have come in that have helped to kind of enrich a little bit of the bench of John Horgan. We've lost people like Carol James is stepping down, and a few others, Michelle Mungle. So we've got people like Nathan Cullen elected, and Murray Rankin. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this new government operates. And obviously, as Alex and others have said, we're going to have a fairly substantive rebuilding process that's going to have to happen with the BC Liberals. I see an urban bloodbath right now. They've really lost seats in key ridings in the city where they should have been able to hold them. Falls Creek, Richmond, Langley. I'm seeing Mission and Chilliwack. So those are the kinds of ridings that BC Liberals have to figure out how to rehold again and find the right candidates and the right mix of people that are going to be able to excite the voters so that they'll come back next time around.
And I'll throw out another question to the group, see who wants to bite on this. Andrew Wilkinson, of course, they're going to wait until the final vote happens to get the final numbers in, but Andrew Wilkinson's days as leader are numbered. Who is going to be running for the leadership? Who will be the next leader of the BC Liberals? Who can look into the crystal ball?
Well, let me go back to the 2013 election here, and you recall the badges, the 801 badges. And you recall they were looking at when they thought Chrissy Clark couldn't deliver on it, and she did deliver on it. Again, Alex articulated some of the reasons why the NDP lost that particular election. But look at it this way. I don't think with the character they have and the characters they have within their current party right now can take this new contemporary era that they need to be in and lead them forward. I think it's going to have to come from someone outside the party. There are several very young, enthusiastic, articulate mayors in British Columbia I think could fit the bill to move this forward. There's other people in other areas that could move this forward, but I can tell you there's nobody in-house, given the ones that were re-elected this time around or newly elected, that, in my opinion, can take the helm and move them into government in the upcoming years.
I agree with Kash, because right now people will say that, it's going to be Diane Watts or it's going to be Kevin Falcon. And I actually like Kevin Falcon. And I think he probably would be good because he's been away for a while. But I think, to be honest with you, as Kash pointed out right at the start, you need some renewal. And it really depends on where the NDP chooses. Do they choose to go a little bit to the left? Do they choose to remain in the center? If they choose to remain in the center, it becomes even more difficult for the Liberals to get elected. And if they keep doing that, I think it's going to be extremely challenging. It also remains to be seen because, Kash brought up Carol James, or sorry, I think Mike may have said that. Carol James is no longer, because of Parkinson's, is no longer in government. And she was trusted by people. She'd been around for a while. Whether you agree or disagree with her policies, the citizens trusted her. And who the new finance minister is going to be extremely important. Whether he, she, or they can win the trust of the electorate and the trust, more importantly, of small business. And if that person can win the trust of small business, I think it's going to be very tough for the Liberals to remove the NDP from power 4 years from now. And that's why I think they need someone new, a different voice with a fresh set of ideas, a policy that can be repeated over and over again, that's easy to understand, and that people can espouse and people can embrace, and vote therefore for the Liberals. Otherwise, it's going to be very challenging.
Yeah, the problem here is a matter of accomplishment. The guys that can't answer and say, yeah, I fully support Andy. He's been a good leader. He's my leader. He's going to be. Dan Burnett had an interview earlier tonight. I was watching. I was seeing off some partners to their plane. They're going back to Toronto, but I parked in front of the airport. I'm watching this thing, and Dan's got Michael Lee, who I like intensely personally, and I think is a great guy. But he's got him on. These guys don't even have media savvy. They should start talking to Klassen and others so they actually know what they're doing in front of a microphone or a camera. But here's Michael Lee not able to fully answer, hey, will you be leader if Andrew Wilkinson is gone? And instead of being smart enough, which he's got plenty of smarts, and say, look, I'm not even going to answer that. I've not even contemplated it. I fully support Andy. He couldn't give him a straight answer. Todd Stone has been making phone calls. to people. Todd Stone's been making phone calls to people saying, hey, look, Andrew's got to go. Are you going to support me? I think the bottom line here is that the BC Liberal Party is finished. I think Andrew Wilkinson will have to resign. I think they'll have to get rid of 99% of the people that were around him for this campaign. These guys ran the single worst campaign I've ever had the misfortune of witnessing. It was a complete train wreck. I think that you need to find a name and an identity that was similar to social credit without it being social credit. I think you need to stay away from federal affiliations. Never mind the BC Conservatives or the BC Liberals, forget all that. You're going to have a real coalition. You need to have a real coalition and stop, talking about it. Andrew Wilkinson is a federal Liberal. He surrounded himself with mostly federal Liberals who have a certain way of doing things, with the exception of maybe Barbeau, who says he's a federal Conservative, but certainly doesn't act like it all the time. The bottom line here is we need to get away from, BC is a completely different animal from the rest of the province. And as you can see with demographic shifts, people are looking for more independence in how they exercise democracy. That's why you're seeing a bump in green fortunes in the Lower Mainland. A lot of it, and I'm not going to get into the back and forth about, is the green movement alive or growing or dissipating. But guys like Sturdy up in West Vancouver should have no problem getting reelected. But that, I think, in part is a protest vote. When Marvin Hunt loses in Cloverdale, in Kevin's old riding, Kevin Falcon's old riding, how the hell do you lose Cloverdale? Well, what outreach did Marvin do, and what support did he get from Andrew to do it? Why did Sturdy lose? What support did he get from Wilkinson to do some outreach? Why is Shirley Bond still a candidate? Mary Polak, last I noticed, was losing. She shouldn't be running again. I mean, if you're going to do some renewal, get to real renewal and cut the crap. You can't have Mike DeYoung, Shirley Bond, Mary Polak, guys like that sitting there. How do you allow a guy like Laurie Throness in the door? They knew about some of his ideas. He never hid them. They're loony. Those are ideas that belong to the Neanderthal period. And here's this guy comparing eugenics to, the party is done. And Andrew's people were lazy. They were incredibly lazy. They didn't do anything for renewal. You look at Horgan, you look at what he did. He was very well organized by Megs. I don't like a lot of the strategy, the policies. But you know what? Again, the BC Liberals didn't prove their case, and lots of times you go out and you prove your case well before the election. I go back to Christy Clark, who I did not like as premier, and I didn't like as a politician at all. But she was brilliant as a retail politician. She did a magnificent job. Gordon Campbell, I agreed with him about 50% of the time. Brilliant job. Bill Vanderzam, I worked for him. Great job. The Ooge, Mike Harcourt. I can name some of these guys who got elected and who Dosanjh assumed the role of premier. These guys, they knew what they were doing. They were in touch with the realities that were in front of them. Doug Leung, who I think everybody on this panel knows, a great federal Liberal strategist, longtime supporter of the NPA in Vancouver, longtime supporter of the BC Liberals, good friend of mine, brilliant strategist. If you ask him, he'll give you one simple line about how people connect to a politician or public servant, and it's an emotional connection. Who would you rather have a beer with? Todd Stone or John Horgan? Andrew Wilkinson or John Horgan? Michael Lee or John Horgan? I think the answer every single time is John Horgan. The only candidate who had, and I say this in full disclosure, I've known Diane a long time and she's a very good friend, but if Diane Watts had won, you would not be in an election right now. Not even Megs could go up against something like that. Diane was not a great leadership candidate, but it would have been a great leader. And Andrew was the reverse. He was a great leadership candidate, but was a lousy leader. If Diane Watts had won, there would be no election right now. Horgan would be scared to death to go up against her, and he'd be right to be so.
That's Alex Tsakumis, and that's about all the time we have for the panel here on Zoom on the theBreaker.news podcast on October 24th, 2020. British Columbia's coronavirus pandemic state of emergency snap election 2020. The NDP under John Horgan has won a majority. Thanks again to Alex Tsakumis, Aziz Rajwani, Kash Heed, and Mike Klassen. And join us again on the theBreaker.news podcast.
John Horgan,
Andrew Wilkinson, Sonia Furstenau.